Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Becoming a True Human podcast. I'm David Kopaz, and this is our co-host here, Chris Smith. Chris,
Hello, everyone. Great to be here and looking forward to today. And we have a very special guest.
we do, we do. Nikhil, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us, a little?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, everyone. I know these two guys from my time working at the VA. We worked on an initiative called Whole Health. It was probably the most magical experience I've had in my professional career. Getting to know these two gentlemen who are doing such great work for the community at large, but did such great work for the VA as well. And my background is I'm trained as a physician, based in Michigan, southeastern Michigan. Educationally, I've trained at University of Michigan and Wayne State University. I practiced clinically in a field called occupational medicine. I had a long career at the VA in that field, as well as in whole health, and I've kind of transitioned on outside to some other opportunities for various reasons, and I'm really glad to reconnect with two of my friends here to talk about whole health and the experiences we had together.
Thanks for joining us today. We're really happy to talk with you. Chris, before we get into it, did you have anything, a joke or, some sort of becoming a true Godzilla crack or anything?
I don't, but I'm just realizing we didn't introduce ourselves, just in case there's a
Yeah.
new listener, maybe one new listener.
Mm-hmm.
My name is Chris Smith. Part of my background is marriage and family therapist, also a mindfulness instructor. I am doing a weekly series on digestive health through the University of Wisconsin mindfulness program. And I'm happy to be here with my two friends, my two colleagues. And I guess I would also say this week I just released a book, book number 2. So I'm trying to catch up with you, Dave,
Yeah.
which will be impossible.
Oh, darn.
But so that's been a lot of fun
Do you have a
doing
copy
that.
there? My copies
I
are downstairs. Show us a cover.
I have a proof copy, so this is what it looks like.
It's
And
proof.
a soft way, a Taoist approach for living with ulcerative colitis. And so it was just kind of a fun book to kind of bring in what I call two different wisdom traditions, the Tao Te Ching, and I used AI and kind of looked at how both of these might inform living with and living fully with ulcerative colitis. The cover, by the way, was designed by my niece who has Crohn's disease. And so that was kind of special having her do that. The other thing I do want to say, this was great. So one of my friends texted me and said, I love the book, but what I really like is the colors. I want to design my kitchen with the colors. And I thought that was probably another great moment for the book. So somebody out there is going to design their kitchen with those colors.
It's having an impact already.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Chris. And congratulations on the book. We'll have a podcast in the future where we just focus and feature the book. So yeah, I'm Dave Kopaz. I'm a psychiatrist, integrative medicine physician, yoga teacher, meditation teacher, artist, author. And Chris and I have been doing this podcast, and we're starting to have guests on the podcast now to talk about people who are becoming human in the world, becoming true humans. Today, we're going to talk about whole health at the VA, what that was, how it's been affected by current government changes, and then what people are doing in the present, and how we can move the idea of whole health into the future. So now I left the VA last year, July, and I felt kind of a mix. I had a push from the VA and a pull towards moving closer to helping my parents. My parents are elderly and they're having some health problems. So I wanted to be closer by to, support them. So there was that reason to move. But also at the VA, I really felt that they created a hostile work environment, particularly Doge, through sending these emails like every week, tell us what you're doing. It's almost like you had to justify your existence. And then leadership at the VA, I felt ambivalent about. Some leaders were really great where they said, um, we want to support you. These things are optional. And if a leader said, I'm not going to do it, you can decide what you want to do, I felt that was supportive. But if a leader said, we're not going to send these weekly emails to Doge, um, but you can choose not to, it felt like you're out on a limb, because if they're going to do it, if they're going to comply with it, then it seems like you're at more risk if you don't. And there are all these things that hit. You guys can correct this if this isn't a good background, but if it doesn't make sense. But there are all these things that hit at once, like the banned words. So I was going through groups with whole health courses where we were taking out words like women, female, diverse, actually even words like trauma, indigenous, all these words we weren't supposed to use anymore. So I felt it really created this hostile work environment where I felt unsafe. There was all this talk about anti-DEI as well. And since I'd worked on the DEI course, I was worried that my name was going to be on some list and I could get fired from the VA for, having written about and worked on DEI. So Nikhil, why don't you tell us a little bit about, how your exit from the VA happened?
Yeah, I think a couple of things here. So I think I think of the VA as an organization it's a large bureaucracy, is subject to changing winds of politics. So I think when we started with Whole Health, or when I started with Whole Health, the big thing was funding. And I remember we looked in the initial part said, are we going to get funding, renewal of funding? Are we going to have our contracts go through? Then we built the program, right? And I think we built the program to be sustainable through any kind of transitions or turbulence that may occur. But I don't think anyone could have predicted this kind of turbulence occurring. So my philosophy at looking at what happened with Whole Health is to equate it to being in the VA and working during the pandemic, where there were such shifting winds of change as to how to approach our work at the VA. And one day you could be told one thing, another day you could be told another thing. And it could be the same person who's telling you those two things between 2 different days. So I think when you have a lot of control from a higher authority level, leadership in a political level, or large bureaucratic organizations outside of the VA kind of telling you how to do things during the pandemic, that is what we were facing. It makes it very difficult day to day knowing what your role is going to be. So I felt that similarly, that there were these issues at the local level, which kind of filter down to those of us working on Whole Health, those of us working in clinical roles as well, which weren't making sense to anyone, no matter what rationale you were given for those reasons. And so basically it felt like everyone was put into, vortex and spun out. And then the people who they wanted to keep for various reasons were kind of kept in that centrifuge. Everything else was spun out, and the supernatant, the fluid was poured away, and you were let go. And so I think with my experience, I noticed, well before Doge came on, that the field I worked in wasn't a very high level priority for certain elements of leadership. And that's, kind of just how it was. I had always thought we would have the backbone of Whole Health to never be broken. So no matter what my role would have been, in my local system, I never thought that Whole Health would be susceptible to any changes from outside. We kept getting money, we kept getting funding. But then when I think Doge came in and we noticed changes such as the languaging changes, the curriculum changes, and then eventually some of the funding changes too, it became very, very hard to see it as sustaining within the VA and also keeping the intent that we had. So I think of, my time at the VA, I think of positively, except what I saw happening, towards the end process is a lot of things changed within, a daily basis, and you weren't really sure exactly who was making the call and why they were making that call because it didn't have any logic to it. So I went from a very stable clinical role, a very stable role with Whole Health, to complete instability. And a lot of things, the reasoning behind that wasn't making a lot of sense. It was basically to me, it seemed like a lot of people saying, I'm going to cover myself and I'm going to throw everything else out that doesn't allow me to cover myself. So I think there's some level of it when I'm processing my time at the VA, which I can say is understandable in a sense that there were pressures, people were reacting to pressures, but it wasn't that idea of a holistic supportive community that we had all hoped for when we signed that contract to continue at the VA, which is a real shame. I think the community of Whole Health, especially, is the one I miss the most. The clinical communities can be replicated, but the community of Whole Health, I feel, is very difficult to replicate outside of that VA context.
Can we back up? Chris, I want to back up to like having Phil define whole health, and then I'll
That's where I was.
turn it
That
over.
was my
Okay.
question.
Oh, good. Yeah. Because we kind of jumped right into it. Mhm.
So say that question again. I just want to make sure I heard it clearly.
Chris will ask it.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. So we're kind of talking about what happened, and I thought I really would like to ask both of you this question, but Nikhil, if you wouldn't mind teeing us off, is what was whole health, and what were some of the kind of, you said it was my experience too, that it was certainly one of the penultimate experiences of my work career and working in whole health. But I wonder if we might be able to kind of just describe some of the characteristics and qualities of whole health for those who are listening to get some sense of what that was like. And you could address it as a provider, as a physician. You could address it through maybe some experiences from patients and maybe other places too. So
Yeah, whole health, I think it's important for us to speak to. It's not about us. We're talking about our roles within whole health. I think it's really important for us. I mean, we're providing our perspectives, but whole health focused on the patient, right? It focused on the veteran. It focused on tools and resources that were evidence-based over time to look at patients holistically, to look at them at the center of this idea, if we call it the circle of whole health, to look at them at the center, that the me at the center of the whole health model is the veteran, and to look at them in 8 different dimensions of self-care, relating to the kind of the outer spoke of that circle, the central spoke of that circle, and then expanding into relationships, partnerships with community, partnerships with the medical system, partnerships with other aspects of care, outside of the medical system as well, preventive as well as curative and treatment related. So whole health focused initially on finding out the veteran's mission, aspiration, purpose in life. Very unique way to approach medical care. I used to teach whole health to some of the students who used to volunteer with me. And if I asked them, what is your mission, aspiration, and purpose in life? I, as a doctor, asking them that question, they were shocked that you're a doctor. Aren't you just going to come and take my blood pressure and give me a pill for my hypertension? That is not what we wanted to do with veteran care. We wanted to reshape the narrative because we noticed database that there were significant issues related to pain, suffering, suicidality, medication compliance and usage with pain medication. So the reason this initiative was created was to address these fundamental problems and to offer the VA as an innovator in addressing these problems. So when we speak, the 3 of us speak today, I'm sure we'll talk about our experiences with whole health, but I think it's very important for us to remember this is a patient-centered model. And that's how it was developed, and that's how we were providing care in that model, clinically as well as education.
Do you want to speak a little bit to your, before we get to like a next level, give your kind of experience in whole health and how you ended up leaving whole health?
And were you saying me? I couldn't hear.
Oh yeah, Chris, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. My experience of whole health actually began at a retreat center. The integrative medicine department in Madison often had a retreat. And so I attended it and it was facilitating some different practices. And that's where I met Adam Rindfleisch. Adam Rindfleisch, I think, was one of the key drivers of whole health in terms of curriculum development. He and Marte Hagman and others created these retreats where I guess I think I'd like to ask both of you what those retreats were like. But I'll just say in general, for me, these retreats were magical. They were several days. They gave room and space for all of us to talk, not only just about what we do, but also to talk about the areas that we might struggle or where we experience different degrees of vulnerability. And out of that came a community of caring individuals. And I'll just end it with this before I hand it over to you. What's amazing to me about that community that formed maybe over 10 years was that many of the people, if not most, still are connected with one another. I mean, today is an example of that. But there were some really, I think, strong bonds that were created in those retreats in the service of whole health that I think is really remarkable. But let me just, before going further, ask both of you kind of your experiences of some of those retreats that I think happened, at least for a while, yearly. So go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to that too. I think, it's ironic, the coincidence that we're talking about this today. I was typing in something in a search, and by accident, I typed in the word Marite in the search yesterday. And it's just powerful, this idea of connection and community that forms, because that is a person, as well as Adam, as you mentioned, who are just so instrumental in shaping, I'm sure for the three of us, what the community of whole health was about. So I remember those retreats with wonderment, because these are people I looked at the time, like all of you, the two of you. These are national people, right? These are figures who are working on this national initiative. Adam wrote this book, Manual Passport to Whole Health. Marte's developed all these training curriculum. Teresa Liao, who's become a friend of mine, developed so many, initiatives related to diversity and equity, which I think were wonderful. So these retreats were times where, for a new initiate like myself, it was an opportunity to work with thought leaders, subject content leaders, expert leaders, but to work with people who actually cared about our development as human beings. So those retreats in Madison were magical. I mean, just wonderful experiences to feel the sense of a small group within the VA is really here to enact change for the betterment of patients, but we're really here to support each other as well. And like you mentioned, Chris, I mean, I still to this day, been out of whole health for a little while. I still to this day, the most contacts I have of any professional network I've ever had are my whole health contacts, like you two and others who have stayed in touch. So yes, those retreats where we were given tools and resources, but also support and nurturing, were wonderful experiences for me.
Thanks, Nikhil. The retreats really were what sustained me for the work with the VA. Like I had difficulties with our leadership too, and frustrations where I did a lot of stuff where I'd give up my lunch hour and do things, run for a few years. I ran this whole health work group, bringing together people from different parts of different departments and different parts of the VA. But it just became unsustainable at some point. And I was like, I would like to keep doing this, but can you have this be part of my job, or can you at least give me somebody who can schedule the meetings, take notes, and send out, invitations? But I couldn't even get that. So I was trying to do all my clinical work plus do this. So there's all this frustration of having this great ideal, this great dream, and then trying to bring it into reality. Even so, I feel like I was able to do so much fantastic stuff during my time. I was at the Seattle VA for 12 years. But the retreats were what really gave me this rejuvenation. I think part of whole health with the me in the center, the me can be anybody. It can be staff, it could be a veteran, it can be anybody who works in the VA, any staff. It could be clinical or it could be non-clinical staff. I also like to take me and a mirror image kind of we below it, because through the me, we wanted to connect to the we of whole health. And the retreats were just so focused on professional development. Sometimes I'd be like, I can't believe I'm getting CME for this, continuing medical education to like do some sort of, kind of like consciousness exploration or to do some of these different things that we did, but it all built. It was all so beautiful. And I remember too, one time thinking at one of the early retreats, this will sound kind of like a joke, but a Buddhist, a Sufi, and a shaman walked into a hospital, and whole health is kind of what happened. There were all these people who had done so many different things because integrative medicine now is a thing. You can kind of go into integrative medicine right out of residency and do the fellowship. But for those of us from an earlier age, we just had to kind of cobble things together. We were doing it out of love of learning and doing stuff like, getting a meditation certification or yoga certification or building these different things because we felt drawn to it. And the great thing with whole health is it all of a sudden created this framework that validated and justified personal growth for the clinician, as well as then personal growth and well-being for the veteran. So I really think it's this great transformative model, and whole health seemed like it grew and grew and grew in kind of a linear, even maybe exponential way. And then we got to a point a few years before all this happened, even like maybe during the pandemic, where I was wondering, is whole health going to transform the VA, or is the VA going to transform whole health? And that's my worry now, is that whole health is just going to become another one of these initiatives that people say, oh, remember when they used to do whole health? That was great. And then what happened? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I can echo that. I mean, I see, in my email box some information from Blue Cross Blue Shield, periodically say, whole health or whole person health. American Academy of Family Physicians has it's a whole health summit, coming up. So this idea of branding what whole health was to what whole health is becoming, is tricky because, we thought of it organically as being a VA initiative, but it's taken on different perspectives. Even those words have taken on different perspective outside of the VA. So I think, as we talk about what the future may be, that may be an interesting thing to consider as well.
And I think we should give credit to the name Whole Health. That was given by Marite Hagman. She's the one that just kind of came up with that term. So I want to make sure she gets a little credit for that.
Absolutely.
I think the other thing that both of you have brought up, and again, I came in not as a VA employer, but as a contractor. And I think one of the things that stood out for me is that this approach not only really invited the patient to consider first their aspirations or what really matters, but equally was the provider the same questions. What is your mission? What is your purpose? What really matters to you? And there was something just that felt, I'm not sure, but it just felt right that both the provider and patient were also equally kind of entering into this particular model by at least first, really kind of considering what are these really essential values that are important and how those values, when really embodied, can inform how one goes about caring for their lives. And so a value, the value that often Tracy Gaudet, who is one of the leaders of this, one of the things that she often mentioned was a veteran who wanted to walk his daughter down the aisle. And that was their particular value. And so then one could begin to think about, well, what might make that happen? Maybe some movement, maybe some meditation, maybe some personal development. And so that really one's goals were fueled by the core value, which could be different, right, for all of us. We all, I'm guessing, may have different values. And that's, to me, is what really made this unique for me and also what stood out.
So whole health was really, I mean, I think all of us had this amazing experience personally as well as professionally, and building this community of these people who we really deeply care about still, even when people leave the program. So, one question what is post VA whole health? How do we move this forward in an authentic way? And I think this was the idea of authentic whole health was one that sometimes would be hard to get across to leadership. Who leadership thought this is something that you're adding on to what we're already doing, or they would think sometimes this is a distraction from the real stuff of what we're doing. And rather than seeing it as something that would support everybody within the system, a new paradigm or framework that could help with burnout, that could help with retention of employees, could help with patient veteran satisfaction. All these different things that really leadership worried about. But the hard thing was how to sell it or convince leadership of what it was, and even to convince staff. Like in the beginning, when I started, it was kind of whole health was this thing that we expected primary care to kind of add on to everything else they were doing, and we kind of moved to this is something that's going to help you, and then you learning it, you can teach the patient how to help themselves. So it's each individual's learning it for their own benefit of well-being. And then it shifts. It becomes, instead of something else that you're having to add on top of everything, it's like putting your life preserver on before you go on the boat, is kind of like what whole health was. And so I don't know, what are both of your visions for how whole health can authentically go into the future? Now there's this Alice Walton whole health kind of school of medicine. We know a number of people who've gone to work for them and have been abruptly let go. Even people who've moved to Arkansas and really committed to work there. And I can think of 4 people off the top of my head who ended up like abruptly having to leave, not through their own intention. So, and that I kind of wondered, would whole health in Walmart be authentic whole health, or would it somehow be some sort of commercial thing that, like they talk about greenwashing, would it be whole health washing? Is there going to be this whole health washing of healthcare where it seems like you're empowering people, but really you're just, doing some sort of mick whole health?
From my perspective, it's tricky because, that Walmart arm of things, I think, we saw really good people go that direction. Okay. And I don't know the reasoning behind why people have left or not, but you saw people who really bought into that. And that means something to me, that there was something there. I mean, obviously, I don't know. Maybe there's financial reasons. We don't know the reasoning behind some of that. But these are people I cared a lot about who went that route. So there was something there that showed to me that there was still some integrity. Now, again, hearing from you that some people have left that, who knows what that model is becoming now if the core constituents who are behind whole health, VA-based whole health, are no longer part of that. So I can't really, I'm sure like you as well, Dave and Chris, I'm sure we can't really validate what's happening moving forward with that model. But I think this, this framework of whole health that we have designed at the VA is still there. The question, I think, fundamentally is, do we give it to someone else? Like we gave it to, the Walmart team, right? In some sense, we gave it to the VA in some sense. Because if you give it to someone else, you give away the power that you inherently have built, because it's always subject to, editing, revision, and things of that nature. Or do we find a way as a community to rebuild it as our own initiative, which could be difficult, as our own, maybe if you think of startup world or whatnot. But if we have a patient population that still is asking for this or still needs these, and we rebuild it as what it was, and then reach out to the community that we were serving and saying, this is no longer the VA whole health, but it is still a resource for you as veterans who have served, and we are here to offer it to you. So these are, the 2 things I struggle with a little bit when I think about whole health. The other thing is whole health will never go away from my personal life of how I live my life, right? So I think that's really important, that whole health is always going to be a part, probably for the 3 of us, of our personal experiences, how we live. And obviously in whatever professional role, these snippets of whole health will probably come through no matter where we are working moving forward. But I am with you, Dave. I struggle with this idea of, the Walmart version of whole health, and then the non-Walmart, what we kind of created version of whole health, and which is more sustainable or even achievable moving forward.
Yeah, I'd like to at least share a little bit for me how kind of whole health has moved forward. I think I want to begin though by saying that when my time as a contractor with the VA ended, which I was involved in social determinants of health, which included DEI. Again, that was ended by the administration. But I have to say, in complete honesty, for about a year, I was in grief, a sense of loss. I just want to name that grief over working with colleagues who I've gotten to know over 10 years. I really enjoyed working in the VA. I just the the mission aspect of that was infectious. Um, Providers and nurses and all staff, at least in my experience as a contractor, were really invested in offering the best care for veterans. And again, I know it's not perfect, but I just want to name that I really did experience the whole, gamut of grief after that. A couple ways that it's come up for me. One is through UW Health in Madison. I've been a part of group medical visits. So I'm paired with a physician. We meet for 6 sessions for 2 hours with a particular population. We're meeting with persons who have inflammatory bowel disease. And in that 6 weeks, we do bring in mindfulness. We bring in the Circle of Health, which is a self-reflective tool that invites participants to kind of reflect on the 8 different areas of the Circle of Health, or the components of self-care, some of those being movement, rest and recharge, power of the mind. So just to name some of those. So it shows up there. The other thing that I've been doing since January is I've been offering a series through the UW Health Mindfulness Program called Mindfulness for Digestive Well-Being. And it's kind of come as you are. And in that, what's been fun for me is we spend part of the time with a different mindfulness practice. And then the second half, we bring in the Circle of Health. So 1 week we can spend on rest and recharge. How might that support digestive well-being? Or how might power of the mind or movement or support digestive well-being? And that has been an ongoing series that at least some of the surveys or feedback, I should say, that I'm getting has been very positive. So for me, it's beginning to live in these small ways, through these 2 different things that I've been associated with. And I do want to say one thing too. One other thing is that actually this podcast is an outgrowth of that. And full transparency, Dave reached out to me one day and he said, "Hey, do you want to do a podcast?" And that was a no-brainer, of course. But really, this podcast really is sort of another version of what Dave and Nikhil and I have been doing the past 10 years with Whole Health. It's just another, really another version of that. So those are just a couple things.
Yeah, the podcast came out of our friendship and all those years of teaching together, going to different cities and teaching and playing practical jokes on each other. And was that thing you'd give like a hand? You had that little rubber hand you'd give people, Chris?
Yeah, it was kind of fun. So whenever
Uh-huh.
someone was being invited to be part of the kind of the whole health faculty, and they usually do this process where they watched, say, like a particular program, like Whole Health in Your Practice. You
Like I
watch,
watched you and Russ, I think, in Little
oh,
Rock.
did, and so
Hmm.
after Dave or Nikhil would after you would kind of do your first, I would give you this plastic hand, just to kind of give you a hand for your expertise and accomplishment.
Yeah. So that friendship, and that work as a team, going somewhere, working together, having a ton of fun. and then just teaching and the playing off of each other too, of getting to know people, what their strengths were, when they're faltering, when to jump in, when you're faltering, and to look at the other person and say, can you, take over right now? I don't know what I'm doing. Um, I need to regroup. So I think that's a great continuation. And things that I did for whole health, like the whole health workbook, the class that I developed with a team at Keep It Sound, and where we sort of operationalized the circle of health. We started whole health, like if you got the circle, how would you build a class around that? And then the hero's journey class that I developed for veterans to help them come home from military service. And then I adapted that to the healer's journey of teaching psychiatry residents who are learning psychotherapy how to be healers, not just technicians. So those are things that are really formative, and I still draw on those on a regular basis. One thing that leaving the VA has allowed me to do is I always had to kind of petition and firewall the writing I did outside of the VA from my work in the VA. So I had to develop almost like a parallel language sometimes of, I'm talking about something without mentioning that I wrote a book about this. And so now in the telepsychiatry that I'm doing, I'm working for a national telepsychiatry company. I can draw on my own book. I've got my own resources as well as VA resources. Like I always have, one of the resources is the VA mindfulness coach. And I tell people there's a free app you can download. You don't have to be a veteran. So in that way, resources that the VA Whole Health developed are things that are spreading out through me to other patients individually that I'm working with. So what are you doing now, Nikhil, since you left the VA?
Yeah, I'm doing a lot of very interesting things. I'm doing some kind of telehealth work as well too, but mostly I'm spending time in academic communities, doing teaching and research a little bit. I think that's something, leaving the VA, it's something I really enjoyed having the opportunity to mentor and teach students, because we found that at the VA, we had a lot of knowledge, but there was also a lot of, there was a lot of pigeonholing, I guess you could say siloing of our own VA community. And most of us work at VAs, which are very closely affiliated to university medical systems or university campuses. So as I started the VA, I just by nature, I like to teach and, got connected through various departments. And I was really enjoying this aspect of teaching, pre-medical students, medical students, graduate students in public health, psychology, and things like that. And it was just wonderful that, I had this bond with voluntary services or, mental health services or internal medicine services. So I was really like fascinated by, I was a VA physician, but wonderfully these departments within the hospital were recognizing I like to teach and mentor. So I'm lucky that I have, some opportunities through the University of Michigan, which have survived through some of those transitions. And also, as I go through some life changes and, personal changes, family changes, I'm blessed to have a community like that, which allows me to continue sharing ideas related to whole health, even if I don't always use the language of whole health, because, we have to be careful about that language too. But yeah, I'm really, really plugged into like that kind of work right now too. I do miss, a 9 to 5 clinical opportunity as well, but I'm blessed in a way that I have a little bit of space in my schedule now to do things like that. Just pursuing other educational opportunities. I'm doing some stuff with business, school curriculum as well too, which is fascinating because there's a real initiative in the business community about wellness and how that can fit into the model of, corporate wellness and corporate ethos and things like that. So as we're discussing Walmart, it's very interesting to see that perspective of what wellness is and what health and healing is, because it's very, in some sense, very different than what we've done. So I would say, I'm kind of in a transition point, a little bit of a sabbatical year of my own, which is something I'm really enjoying. But I'm really blessed to be able to share some of this knowledge with, generations that are up and coming in terms of healthcare practitioners, as well as, community peers in the academic setting who have had some value to this work as well too.
It's one of the memories I have with you is your mentoring. When I was in your neck of the woods many years ago. I remember you had a number of residents, I think, that you were supporting, and I just remembered how they very much liked interacting with you.
I think that's what makes the system sustainable in a way, right? We have, these opportunities outside of the VA to form these connections and bridges. I mean, you talked about UW, which really has created a lot of whole health when you think about it. We took the model that UW had at University of Wisconsin and brought it to the VA, right? And then we adapted it or implemented it in the VA. But a lot of those training, I mean, we were using the University of Wisconsin website resources for quite a while too. So I think, I find a lot of support within the academic community. I always have. When I was at the VA, I would be doing that after work. I'd come home and do these Zoom calls, or I'd do these weekends, because like Dave, you're saying, you have to keep these separate lives, and it's crazy in a way. But I was doing probably 15 to 20 hours of work outside of my formal job, because you have to separate the two. And I'm just so fortunate that I don't have that stress now, in a way, the stress of the VA, to kind of do these things with my academic partners as well. So, but yeah, I love that experience. I remember you and Stephanie, Chris, had come, I think. And yeah, we had so many, medical students, residents, public health students, psychology. I think one psychology graduate student in that course that you taught. So we really appreciated that, those bonds with the university.
One thing I remember, Nikhil, with you, one of the last retreats we were at in Florida. You remember that time when we had everybody out talking outside and the tree frog fell out, into the middle of the group? What's your memory of that whole discussion that we had there?
Of the time outside, or just the whole
Yeah,
process?
just the time, just anything that you draw from that retreat, or from
One of my last
yeah.
experiences, I think, together in person, that could have been the last experience together in person. So I draw on that with a little bit of emotion as well. I think, now realizing this would be probably the last time all of us were together, in person, I draw that, these experiences outside of the formal curriculum, where we would go out to eat. We would cross over like a busy highway, run across the street to a restaurant, eat, see it's about to downpour, and then come back to the hotel and just sit together and talk together as there was like a monsoon going on outside the hotel. And just these informal conversations, walking, the first session I'll see, a couple of people sitting by themselves and talking, and you don't know what they're talking about, but you feel happy that they have the space to share whatever they needed to share with each other. So, I think we were thinking for a while that may not happen. There may not be funding for that to happen. And I remember some of our leadership at that time within the whole health community said, we don't know how many more of these we're going to do together. And it's bittersweet, because, now we know that there aren't going to be any of those together. But I remember we started, I can't remember who it was. You guys will have to remind me, but we did like a dance off I can't remember. It was like the central area of the
Flash mob,
hotel.
the
Flash mob, that's
flash
right.
mob
Yes,
that we
flash
did.
mob,
Yeah,
right in the,
yep.
and these people were looking at us, who were kind of sitting there in kind of the bar area, and they're like, but they were having fun with it. And they're like, oh, how cool that these guys are doing a flash mob kind of right here in the center. So these are kind of the experiences I'll always remember. The first
Baby
retreat in
Shark.
Madison.
Remember, it was the song Baby Shark.
Baby Shark, that's right, Baby Shark. I love that. We played, we had a song and you had to identify who picked that song. And I was trying to think for the goofiest song I could think of, and just Baby Shark kept popping in my head. And so I think, I can't remember who was with me, but when that song came up, they were like, yeah, it's your song, right? I was like, yeah, it's my song. So no, just memories like that, Dave. I remember that first retreat in Madison I attended. They had you come up, and we had the kind of the board that you drew on, and you were talking about the wounded healer, right? The model, which I think is such a powerful model for us to think about in reflection about, what we've gone through with our journeys at the VA. And that stuck with me at that time, right? That there's someone who really cares about us as healers. Chris and I were in Nashville together. And I think first we met, and the first thing we did is we went for Indian food at that restaurant, buffet. And you said, yeah, come on, let's meet here and let's go for a buffet. And I may have been one of the first, or, early times I taught with you. But I think it was just wonderful having that experience of, walking around, talking about whole health, talking about connection and purpose in our careers and our lives. watching you get a horrible haircut later during, oh, sorry, I didn't say that out loud, during the trip. But it's these small moments of community, which I think for us as healers and medical providers and, clinical providers, where I think we have to heal ourselves before we can heal others as well. And I think that this community provided that for us.
Nikhil, one of the things that has happened on this podcast is it took about a year,
Is it
but
singing,
Dave,
Chris? Are you gonna ask me to
yeah,
sing?
Dave and I said, "Oh, we're calling this," and again, this comes from Dave, of course, "Becoming a True Human" podcast. And so we just started asking our guest, what does that mean? I mean, we don't know. And so, but this question comes up for me to ask you just because of what you shared already. I feel like you're speaking to this question, but one of the things that we have gotten now into a routine asking is, what is becoming a true human from your experience and your wisdom?
Yeah, I think about like 16, 17 months ago, we had a wonderful family trip with my entire family, immediate family that we took. And again, I'll be careful not to get too emotional, but it was just something where you think about it at the time, and it was just a family trip. But obviously over time, as things change in life, it carries a lot of significance. So I came back from that family trip and I started to see all these machinations at the VA occurring. And, I went into the trip beforehand also dealing with some of that, they're kind of doing some strange stuff at the VA now. And look, it's even affecting me. And, went into that trip with, quite a bit of stress, even though it was a major trip that we were taking. We planned for years and years and years. So thankfully, during that trip, I was able to enjoy that trip. That stress of the VA was in the back of my mind. Came back to the VA and, obviously changes with Doge and changes with, local facilities and leadership and things like that. And, I was doing some really great work at the university as well, kind of celebrated that work, and then shifted to the VA and said, okay, now I'm realizing this isn't the right place to be. And then had some amazing career opportunities develop pretty quick after that, and pursued some of those, kind of went through some of those processes and kind of enjoyed that. And then said, oh, now I realize, didn't say it, but it hit me that there's something bigger in life that I have happening in my life that I have to kind of shift my mindset towards. So I think becoming human for me is realizing pivots, right? So understanding that I was so frustrated by the VA, situation, that I have given my heart and soul to this institution and the way these, processes related to those are being handled, how horrible to treat human beings, okay? But then I realized that there was a life outside of the VA, and it's okay to pivot and realize you are greater than that. I think no matter what struggle anyone listens to this podcast is going through, you are greater than that struggle, especially you maintain your integrity, you maintain your ethics, you maintain your value system, because that is going to carry you through whatever personal and professional challenges you're having in your life. And so I say becoming human, leaving the VA made me human. And it was actually, I will say this, like a weight coming off me the day I dropped up. I literally, people were checking in on me. I was like, I've never been happier. I'm so happy to be shed of this. And I do miss, I miss the people I worked with. I miss the veterans. I miss it tremendously. But at the same time, it was destroying me instead of making me become human, and in the sense as well, if that makes sense. The work we did, that community will always sustain that. But I think it's very important for us to realize that we are bigger than that. And so becoming human is this process of, for me, realizing that keep a steady state, because life is going to require you to keep that steady state. There's things that are out of your control. Do what you can within your control and realize the rest is out of your control. So I think as we talk about, whole health foundly, and I think at Dave, as you speak about your experiences at the VA, it brings back sadness for me too, to hear your experience and to talk about my experience. But I think we did some amazing work at the VA, and I'd rather reflect on that part of the VA, the friendships I've formed for the rest of my life, the curriculum, things that you've developed, right, that you spoke about, things we developed as a group, the veterans we've touched, the people who, if we put this together again, there will be veterans who will say, I remember you guys. Thank you for bringing this back, right? So that will have meaning to us as well. But what we accomplished as a community is so important. But what they got out of it, I think, is even more important. These patients who needed what we provided, and systems are systems, and we can't control the system, but we have the opportunity to, keep that within ourselves as human beings and to continue to share that. So that for me is becoming human, understanding, riding the ebbs and flows of life, professionally and personally, and staying true to my core values is very important to me.
Wow, that's really, really beautiful. Thank you for that. That's a gift. I want to share with you one thing as you were talking, this thought came up, and it's this, that the light that I remember in you when I first met you continues to burn, if not even brighter. So it's just great seeing that and experiencing it.
Thank you. Yeah.
Dave?
That was beautiful. That was really beautiful, Nikhil. Thank you for that. And Chris, you said something about grief earlier, and so I, went back to Kübler-Ross's stages of grief, and can identify the anger in myself and this little bit of punk rock, anti-authoritarian like thing that I came into this podcast with, of like, let's, speak truth to power type of thing, and expose, what happened to the good people at the VA. But also part of grief, is depression and bargaining, denial, and then the acceptance. It really sounds like, Nikhil, you're in that acceptance phase of you're saying, I got all this great stuff. It really wasn't about me, It was never really about me. It was always about the veteran, always about helping everybody else. So, that's a beautiful way of thinking of how we can move forward with whole health. Yeah, but thank you for being here and for sharing words from your heart.
So
One of the things that sometimes we ask at about this point in the podcast, Nikhil, is there anything else that you'd want to say that hasn't been said? Is there anything you want to say to the audience? Is there anything you'd want to share? I mean, you did some of that already, but I just want to make sure that if there's something else that you have space for that.
I think always find time. I think Dave, you did, and Chris as well. You mentioned that this idea of whole health fits in me and we, right? And so I think always find time for the we as well as the person you're providing care for, assistance to. I think that's very important. I think we have created resources that are still there, and so if anyone listens to this podcast and has curiosity about anything we're talking about. The way to sustain this is to keep the interest alive as well too. So we've talked about a lot of different resources and things of that nature. I mean, I think as people who believe in this initiative of full health and the concepts created, it's important for us to hear from you that we're speaking to. I mean, this is a asynchronous platform in a way. There's not an audience listening to us right now, right? We're not in a studio with a group behind us. So and I'm sure the two hosts would invite you to reach out to us. I mean, this is very important that we hear from you about what connected and resonated with you. And it's my first time being on this podcast, and so happy to be on this podcast. But I hope we can hear from you about this episode and other episodes as well, and what may have resonated with you. We all are not. I mean, by some sense, we've trained and put in years of effort in this, so there's some expertise. But I think the three of us would love to continue learning as well, right? So if there's an opportunity for us to learn from you in the community who's gravitated to this, I think that would be fantastic for us to keep learning, as well as we talked about how do we keep full health going. But what can we as a full health community learn from now being outside of the VA? The boundaries are off, right? We had boundaries that we were in the VA. We could only use what the contract has approved, right? It's not set to distribute because it hasn't gone through formal approval processes. Those boundaries are off. So however we keep this sustainable, can we even improve on the model that was built? I think it's very important to learn from those in the community who may have gifts to offer to us. So thank you, Chrissy. I think you mentioned, and Dave as well, that what I said was a gift, but we want to hear gifts from others in the community as well. So I think that would be kind of parting ending comments on my end that I feel like I still have a lot to learn. I feel like I'm still that person who went to the first retreat in Madison and learned how to do improv, right? How can you learn how to do improv, right? But I learned how to do improv. And, Adam, who wrote The Passport to Whole Health, and Teresa Liao, who I mentioned earlier, these are two big wigs in whole health, and they're going to evaluate me on how I just wing it when I present part of this curriculum that was created, right? And, I think people, told me just be your natural self. And I think that really is important advice people have given me too in whole health. But I think, just, I think there's so much that we still have to learn. I think it's so important. And I want to continue learning. And I think that's very important for me to lead with. I'm not here to say this is the right way that we've created. I think we can work on this and evolve this and tweak this and look at maybe it's a Walmart partnership, a corporate partnership, or maybe it's an academic partnership like University of Wisconsin to find some way to keep this sustainable in some shape. So that would be what I hope we get out of this podcast. Someone listens to us and says, I believe in this. I want to help you mold it and remold it and bring it back because veterans want this, right? And we need to provide this for veterans and we need to implement this for ourselves as well.
Thanks for leading us in the pulse check.
That's right. So the evaluation, the pulse check.
Right, right. I mean, that's something that was so great. Every time we would teach a course, we'd do a pulse check at the end. And every day, we'd go through at the end of the day. And that was a great time too. We'd be sitting there. We're all kind of strung out and wiped out and tired. But before we'd go and eat or do anything else, we'd be like, let's look through the feedback for the day. What worked? What didn't work? What can we do better? We're always trying to improve. And we're always trying to, I thought of it as three different things that whole health was. It was knowledge. It was, so the didactics. It was experiential. So it was, movement or mindfulness. And it was, what's the third thing I always say, Chris? Like reflection or something or discussion. Yeah. So with these three different things. And I felt like I was always trying to build a triangle that didn't do too much knowledge, didn't do too much experiential, and didn't, and included enough where people could talk and share ideas. And that model of ongoing reflection, ongoing personal growth for the teachers as well as for the participants, I think is a really interesting one that's very whole health.
Yeah, I agree. Dave, I remember when we were in, where were we? Atlanta. Remember when the slide projector went down and we improv for, I think, at least half of the day. Maybe that's an exaggeration. But all of this work that we did and on retreats and with each other with the pulse checks, I think really helped us in that moment,
I think it's important for us to recognize what you're saying. This isn't evidence-based, right? There was a lot of time spent to make sure data was collected. We were making sure that, we could present this information. Our leadership in whole health was sharing, what this meant to, Congress and government for funding allocations and things like that, right? So what we did was evidence-based science. People call this all like, what is it, the woohoo kind of stuff or whatever. Like this isn't like this is pseudoscience. It's not pseudoscience. It's real science. And I think this idea of affecting veterans by showing reduction of pain medication doses and showing, holistic ways of living, I think has meaning. And so I think, these stories we share about our own experiences, I think, are powerful. And I think, but it's really also powerful what we accomplish for the patient as well. I think for ourselves, we're going to keep this, and hopefully our patients will keep it with them as well.
Yeah, I think one of the powerful things was the stories that would come from veterans. And again, I think really moved whole health forward, in terms of working with pain or depression, suicide.
And I'll tell you, like, I don't want to speak to, like, they haven't paid me as an endorser to help them. But, Chris and Dave are good people. The people behind whole health are good people. I remember Adam Reins, I can't say his last name, but Adam, who developed the Passport to Whole Health. The first time he met me was a course we were doing in California. And he said, Nikhil, it's nice to meet you. Let's go take a walk. I said, what's this guy going to do? Is he going to interrogate me? Like, is he going to question, like, should we have given this person a role on this team? He said, let's go take a walk. I want to go to the beach that's across from the clinic and pick up shells for my sons, because my sons, I miss them and I'm thinking of them, and I just want them to have a memory of kind of who their dad is, right? In paraphrase, something similar to that. So we were walking along a beach, and then we realized, oh, it's close to time for when the course should be resuming from the lunch break. Run, run, run. We go back into the clinic, sweating, sweating, sweating. And this is the guy who wrote the Passport to Whole Health, right? So this is the guy who wrote the manual. So these are people, if you're listening to our podcast, who truly deeply care about health, the way healthcare is in this country, the way that we can reform healthcare, the way we can change healthcare, what veterans have gone through in their service time, and how we can help them reacclimate and reintegrate in society, and also how we can continue these efforts moving forward outside of the VA. So I celebrate you two for having this, and thank you both for having me today.
Thanks for being here. I feel like it's not a podcast if I don't grab a book at some point off the shelf. And this is the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, Achieving Whole Health. You can buy this book, but you can also download the PDF of it for free off of the National Academy's website. But it reviews, kind of the evidence base of whole health, and what they concluded was that VA whole health is working, that it's cost effective, that it addresses numerous issues for patients as well as for staff, and that it should be spread throughout the healthcare system, not just spread throughout the VA, but actually, they're saying that there should be a joint office set up of VA whole health and Medicare, and then trying to figure out how we can put whole health out into the larger healthcare system.
And I just want to make one note about that. There was a recent, no matter where you're on the political spectrum, there was a recent, nomination for CDC director, who, if we look at some of the work that she's done in preventive medicine and look at some of her social media, talks about the health benefits of going on a walk. Okay, so this is stuff that isn't going away. I know for people who are somewhat skeptical of what we're talking about today, this is something we need in this country. And, this idea of movement and 8 areas of self-care, this idea of what the National Academy of Sciences has published, I think these are things which are, please understand that we want to keep this going, not for ourselves, but because we feel as a country we need these initiatives. So
Yeah, that's great.
I think that's a great place to end. And so we really want to thank you for being on the podcast, and we'll invite you back for another round in the future. I was also thinking it might be cool to kind of bring in maybe people who've left VA whole health for maybe like a round table sometime. Yeah.
great. Yeah.
Yeah. And have a few
At your place, Dave, is what we're saying. We'll host it.
Well, we're doing a Healers Council monthly, and so I've kind of set the invitations regional, but I think we could include you in the monthly invitation, and we've got space here. I'm sure Chris has like a hot tub over at his house and a cold plunge or something that you can do.
For Giannis, to keep Giannis in Milwaukee. I've heard that's what that hot tub is going to be for, as he comes up on a free agency decision there.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I'll add you onto that list, because that's something that I felt when I moved to Madison. Madison was very near and dear to me because of all the whole health people here, and to be an hour away from Chris and I, we just hung out like Thursday night after he taught a course with UW. We hung out in the backyard, had some tea, trying to manage my barking dog. And then after you left, Chris, Adam texted me and said, "Hey, I hope you don't think I'm a stalker, but I'm looking into your backyard." And so he was over at Catherine's house having dinner, and we went back and met at the back fence there. And Adam and Dexter were there, and we met Catherine. So, somebody who works in UW mindfulness lives right behind me. So when Chris came over to help me unpack books, he was like, "Hey, I think that's Catherine's house right there." So, so there is this kind of feeling in Madison of this coming together. It's kind of central in the country. I'd like to do a retreat sometime, to try and do like our old retreats that we did, but have it just sort of, all of us get together. Probably wouldn't be this year, but maybe just invite people from, whole health to come together and to continue the conversation, as the first course was called. Yeah. So thank you both so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So I'll stop recording here. You can stay on the call here for a minute.